This is an area that is deep, okay? So the answer is yes, but being a lawyer, of course, there's always a but, right? So there are 3 types of mental injuries in the workers' compensation realm, okay? The first is where you have a physical injury that leads or includes a mental condition. Classic example, you herniate a disc in your low back and you become depressed because it hurts really badly. You're not able to do things you used to like to do. You have a little kid, you can't play with a little kid, you're not making as much money, you get depressed. And as long as the injury, the pain and disability associated with the injury are a substantial cause of that depression, that mental condition is going to be compensable. Second category is what we call a mental physical claim. This is where you have exposure to something that is so traumatic that it leads to a physical event. Classic example of this is there's a reported case, a law officer found a very badly decomposed body and had a heart attack. I mean, it was just the stress, and everybody's like, yep. The medical experts said, yeah, the stress of that exposure substantially contributed to that heart attack. Third category is what's called a mental, all right? This is where you have a super stressful job, okay? You're a work comp lawyer, okay? No, lots of jobs are very stressful, okay? You have a very stressful job, and as a result, you get depressed, or you have terrible anxiety, and nobody's disputing that you have this psychological condition. The problem is those aren't covered. There's a long history of Minnesota case law dating back to the 70s. There was sort of a triumvirate of cases decided in the 70s, one in the 70s, one in the 80s, one in the 90s, that said a purely mental stimulus leading to a mental condition is not a covered claim under the Minnesota Workers' Compensation statute. Now, about 10 years ago, there was a terrible set of shooter went into a school, shot a bunch of people, killed students, killed teachers, injured people. It was horrible, horrible. And a number of those claims were held not to be compensable because, and not the people who survived and got depressed, but people who saw their friends get killed or injured, or saw students, teachers seeing students get shot. And those claims were denied. And they fell within that mental category. So in about 2013, the legislature changed the law and they created an exception for PTSD. And it's a narrow exception. Doesn't apply to every set of injury, because not everybody who has a mental condition fits a diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder. But there is a limited exception then. It's defined in the statute as an occupational disease, and it needs to be diagnosed by a licensed physician, a psychiatrist, psychologist, and then you have to satisfy the DSM-5 requirements. So it's pretty strictly applied. But that change in the law was a direct legislative response to this terrible tragedy that happened, and probably happened more than 10 years ago. That's the problem when you get middle-aged like me. Everything is 5 or 10 years ago, and it really was more than that. So that's the long-winded answer to whether or not mental conditions are covered.